This is Mario Andretti, and you are listening to Below the Yellow Line.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Below the Yellow Line. We've all watched races on TV, listened to them on the radio, and heard legends like and Chris Economaki call the action. But tonight on Below the Yellow Line, we have somebody most of you will recognize from YouTube or somewhere else, and then someone who's also trying to become that next legendary voice in a NASCAR broadcast booth. It is my honor to welcome in Jonathan Ramos, a.k.a. IDK Player, to the show. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. It's a beautiful night. I'm excited for what's to come, and I'm glad I had time to come on.
Absolutely appreciate it. Got some rain and thunderstorms going on here. Hopefully you can't hear those, but a nice. It's not technically spring yet. Jumping right in here, we all have an origin story as far as how we got into this mess of a sport. What is yours? How did Jonathan Ramos become a NASCAR fan, a racing fan?
So I grew up in South Florida, and NASCAR obviously had the championship there for so long. And my dad used to go ahead and teach at Homestead High School. So when NASCAR was looking to come on in, and they would sometimes bring the merch haulers to the actual school, he would go there, look at the diecast, and he told me that he always was a race fan, but it was more towards the IndyCar and the Formula One side rather than the NASCAR side. And then during NASCAR's boom in the late 90s, early 2000s, including with the popularity of the sport going up in South Florida, the championship came. He started following a lot more. And then finally, when I became, alive in this world, he started showcasing it to me. So it started with Formula One really early in the morning on Sundays, and NASCAR would be on later that afternoon. And according to him and my mom, it started when Elliott Sadler went up and over at Talladega when I was about 2 or 3 years old. And that was it. Apparently I was hooked since then. Obviously I have no remembrance of that, but I'm going to take their word for it. The earliest I remember a race was actually Dale Jr.'s wreck at Talladega in 05 after Vickers, I believe, got into the side of Johnson. So I've been a race fan for a long time. Went to my first race in 2009 at the Homestead Miami Speedway. I've been continuing that tradition. And it was weird being the only NASCAR fan in school for so long until I went to high school. And then the racetrack, Homestead Miami Speedway, was just about a mile away. So I got to see the track every day. People understood NASCAR, but it was cool because now looking back on it, it was very unique to me. Not too many people were saying that they're NASCAR fans, but when NASCAR came to town, there's a huge influx, a sold out crowd. And I just became hooked ever since I was a kid.
We have very, very similar stories there. Now, the flip that I remember at Talladega was 2013, Kurt Busch flipping on top of Ryan Newman. More of that Talladega race than I do the race before, which doesn't make sense at all because I went to that Richmond race. I actually fell asleep with about 30 laps to go, somehow sitting in the fourth row up from the grandstands. I don't know how I accomplished that feat, but that was my first memory. And again, being the only NASCAR fan in school, it's weird. Trust me, even now, still in high school, it's still that way. I doubt they're going to come build a multi-million-dollar racetrack in my backyard. So if NASCAR wants to do that, by all means, might be a little too late by the time I'm out of here. But that's great. And a family tradition too. Racing's a sport more than any other at generational. That generation to generation love. And you talk about with your dad being an F1 fan, an IndyCar fan, and that translating over to NASCAR. Flipping over from NASCAR to content creation. When did your interest in content creation and doing NASCAR stuff on YouTube really start to develop?
So it actually started really, really early. And the YouTube channel that's now has evolved over the years, but it started with a different YouTube channel back in 2013. So as most people probably did around the time, I grew up watching stop motions on YouTube because I thought it was like the coolest thing ever. First off the gun, I saw Eric make a bunch of stop motions. I thought, man, how does he do this? I want to figure it out. And then I figured it out and I said, oh, I want to try this. So I got a bunch of Gen 6 diecasts in 2013 that I just got, and I would make little paper racetracks or just go get cardboard cutouts, and I'd start doing them. So it was on an old YouTube channel that was at one point named J Ramos Cup Series, and that was 2013. I did a season or two of it and then kind of fell out of it because it did take a lot of time. And I thought, okay, I found out YouTube has an algorithm. So all my friends, including this time in middle school, they loved a couple things. It was Call of Duty, it was NBA 2K, and it was Grand Theft Auto. And I thought, man, these are what my friends like. I'm just going to stop the NASCAR stuff and I'm just going to go into this. And I did. I went into it, brand new channel. It didn't do well at the start. You see my YouTube channel, it says it's been around since 2016. It definitely did not just come up out of nowhere. A lot of mistakes, I would guess you could call it failures, but that's the reason why I am where I am today, is because of all those miscues and stumbles. And then finally around 2017 when Grand Theft Auto Cars 3 released, and I was a huge Cars fan growing up, still am actually. And I thought, man, I wish I could just recreate some of these like scenes from the movie in Grand Theft Auto 5. At the time, I thought they were really well done. I watched back on it recently. I was like, yikes, I don't know what I was doing, but I was just having fun with it. And then all of a sudden I got the ball rolling to go back into NASCAR. All my friends still want to play Call of Duty and Grand Theft Auto. But I thought, just because all my friends want to do it doesn't mean I have to do it. And I still love NASCAR, even though I was one of the only people, what it felt like in South Florida, to like it. With me being in early high school, leaving middle school, I thought this is a perfect opportunity just to jump back in it with NASCAR Heat 2. I did. And then NASCAR Heat 3 came, did some news videos, brought back live streams with Grand Theft Auto, just trying to, do races. It was definitely in this weird path for so long. 1 second I was doing one thing, then I was doing another thing. Every year was just a different thing that I wanted to do. I couldn't stick with one thing. And then finally, I started falling in love with broadcasting through Project Cars 2. So I used to live stream Project Cars 2 with a headset. I wouldn't say like this. It's definitely a cheaper headset. I would yell into a microphone. I thought it was cool. At the time, I thought I knew what I was doing. I've recently watched back on it. I clearly had no idea what I was doing. But it made me fall in love with broadcasting. It made me fall in love with being in front of a camera again, being able to speak to the audience, and then just evolved. And it soon got to where NR Night in America is today.
Well, that's a great story, and you talk about video games being the start of your thing. Please, nobody go back and watch it. And that's how I got started. I have a note in my phone. I looked at it from about probably 20, 25 days ago to go back and delete a bunch of stuff from quarantine because I was bored. Started this monstrosity up, and it was nowhere near. I mean, the quality of the content, it was horrible. Your stuff looks like it should win an Emmy next to my first things. But I love that it snowballed into what it is today. And like you said, you got your start with NR Night in America and with iRacing, with virtual racing before it translated into the real world. Tell us a little bit more about how did your path to virtual broadcasting get started, and how did that, kind of like William Byron's story on the driving side, how did that turn into a career broadcasting at tracks like Nashville Fairgrounds and Bristol here in a few weeks?
So this is where it gets really interesting. So I technically started the broadcasting stuff in the 5th grade when I did the school news. It was once a week. It was on a Friday, and I loved being in front of the camera because I thought it was cool. My mom said, she was like, "Oh, you should, consider doing this in the future." And being a 5th grader, you're like, "Mom, what are you talking about? Me go and be in front of a camera like on a news station? Get out of here. It ain't gonna happen." And then when the stop motion stuff happened, you have to commentate over those races. My mom said the same thing. And I thought, get out of here, man. This makes no sense. This is not going to happen. And then when I started streaming again through Project Cars and NASCAR Heat 3, I would stream the Project Cars races where there's just 16 cars. I'd yell into a microphone. Mom said it again. And she's like, "You probably should consider this." I'm like, "Are you kidding me? Who's going to pick me up? I'm heading into college. I'm calling on a microphone at the PlayStation. I don't have a PC or any connection. It's not going to happen." And then all of a sudden, a time in my life where things really started to change. I'm getting ready to finish community college. I have a decision to make. Do I go complete the next 2 years at a university? Do I maybe head into a trade? Do I just start a career now? And during COVID is where things changed. I found out NASCAR Heat 5 is going to be a copy and paste from NASCAR Heat 4. A lot of people in the community were not pleased with that. And I thought this is a perfect opportunity to not just rely off of news videos, to just rely off of what's trending at the time. And I downloaded NR 2003. I figured out how to do the mods. And I did a couple streams on that where I would commentate over the AI races. And then all of a sudden people started to really like it. And at the time, 79, 80 people watching concurrent. And I was doing backflips over it. Then all of a sudden, in that moment, I started calling it, hey, it's NR night. Just that's what it was. We would do Grand Theft Auto races, do Heat 5 races, and then we'd do NR night. It's just the night we'll do NR. That was started evolving because all of a sudden it got very predictable. Certain tracks, where they were going to pass the AI. You knew which tracks were going to be track position because the AI was really on a track, like an invisible track racing around the racetrack that you see on screen. And the opportunity for iRacing came. I tried iRacing a couple times while racing. I realized I wasn't good at it. I figured that out right away. And then all of a sudden, the opportunity came when the next gen released. I remember I did a stream earlier that day. Wasn't doing well. My channel was definitely in a nosedive for viewership. I was in, once again, this huge crossroad. iRacing just randomly released the next gen this day. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess I'll stream it. Then 200 people tuned in and I raced it. I was like, wow, man, that's awesome. You guys are here for iRacing? Well, I know you probably won't stay long term because I'm not the best racer, but I remember playing around with the idea earlier in November of taking the NR stuff to iRacing itself because the camera angles look better. There's more to play with. There was more cars to innovate with. I can go back in time to 2007, make people run certain paint schemes. I can use the modern day stuff. And that's when the iRacing took off. I did my first NR night race. People really loved it. And I was like, all right, we got something here. Now I got to learn how to code the overlays in. Okay, people really like this. So I have a cheap microphone, really tough to listen to. But the thing is, I say that it's tough to listen to, but I now honestly enjoy that it happened because I can look back and I see growth. Before I thought about it, like, oh, I'm just going to delete all the old live streams. They're embarrassing, including way back in the Grand Theft Auto days. But now I realize just privating them, it's important to me because I sometimes look back thinking, this is where I was in this time. And I wouldn't be where I am now if it wasn't for yesterday, what I did the days before. I was giving 110% and innovating, 110% innovating. So the iRacing stuff started taking off and I realized I need to stick with this long term. The NASCAR Heat stuff was happening still. There was supposed to be a new game coming out. It was taking a lot longer. I didn't want to just be a console player and doing videos off console games. I thought I really want to do this broadcasting thing. I finally told my parents that and they're like, oh man, it's great. It's about time. So next thing I know, I started innovating. I got a job at a luxury store, went ahead and started taking all that money and plugging it into iRacing because I realized I really can't tell how good of a commentator I am if I don't have the best equipment. And then I started realizing I need to go ahead and learn a lot more off races. So NR night in America used to be really long nights. We used to do 7, sometimes 8 hours of racing. We'd go from 8 a.m. on the East Coast to 3 in the morning. And my sleep schedule was destroyed because right after those races, I would turn the stream off. I would go ahead and put an old race on, and I just start taking notes off of Mike Joy, Alan Bestwick, listen back to old MRN broadcasts, see how they did it. And that's when I came into another crossroad in my life. It was the start of 2022. My parents said, we couldn't afford Miami anymore. It's outpriced us. We have to move. You can come with us. And I said, well, I still have school. What am I going to do? Am I just going to, move with you guys and do school online? And I thought that wasn't a bad idea. And then I realized the degree I was going for was not going to be enough to truly make me a broadcaster. I needed to take a semester off and just learn broadcasting on my own. And honestly, that's the best thing I think I've ever done. I'm about to finish school up right now. I have like 2 more credits left. And I look back at the time when I took that semester off and thought, wow, I learned more about broadcasting in that section than I probably could ever learn just by going through school. And then it came to a point where I thought, man, I got to go see this place that they're moving to. They moved to Central Florida, Sebring. And I go to the house. There's no Wi-Fi ports to go ahead and set things up. There's clearly going to be no internet there. There was no connection. We were in the middle of nowhere. And this is someone that grew up in the city, grew up, with there being connection everywhere. And I thought, oh no, this is going to destroy broadcasting for me completely. And I had connections to possibly go to other short tracks in the Florida area. But at that time, I told my mom, I was like, I have to go somewhere else. Either I have to go to a different part of Florida. Maybe I go up to North Carolina where there's a lot of short tracks. And then I got an opportunity call from the Indianapolis Motor Speedway to do the e-ticket events. They wanted to do an e-ticket event sponsored. It was with the IMS Museum. And I thought, Indy wants to do an event with me. And this was in 2022, around April. And I thought, man, it's awesome. Enter Night in America was really taking off. Viewership was up. Driver demand was up. Everyone was excited for just that next stream. And then all of a sudden, I got let know that the fairgrounds probably wanted to do a virtual event. And I thought, hey, okay, I got to probably rethink this. I have very few connections to North Carolina. I have a couple connections in Florida. I know the fairgrounds are broadcasted. IMS is only about 3 or 4 hours away, and there's a lot of short tracks in Indiana. I might have to look at Nashville because I also have friends that live in Nashville and I have family members that live in Nashville. So it would be a huge jump to go from South Florida to Middle Tennessee. But at least if there is that culture shock, if there is that homesickness, I have people that surround me. So that's when I decided to just say, okay, maybe I have to go where at least the signs are to start. And if I don't like it, I don't like it. I can move. I can go somewhere else. So with me also taking that semester off, I realized now I can uproot and go. So then Enter Night in America moved here to Nashville. Still I'm in Nashville as of this moment. And I started going to the racetrack. They didn't put me in the booth right away. They had me run social media, which was great. I got to learn drivers. I got to hear their stories. And over time, the IMS deal fell through. By the time they approved of having the event, it was way too late to set up an e-ticket because the e-ticket events take a really long time to set up and a lot of, creative control. And Nashville, I told them, I said, hey, all this talk is about having NASCAR come here. Why don't we try it on iRacing? And they loved the idea. So we brought the Xfinity series to it. They watched the race. They loved it. They loved the audio quality, the track walk that I did. And then it gave me an opportunity to actually call at the Salem Speedway, then Salem, Indiana, for an ARCA race over the PA. And I thought that was like the coolest thing ever. I was excited for it. Called that race in September. They said, all right, we're going to keep in touch. You're going to continue to finish out the year at the fairgrounds with social media. We'll talk in the off season. And they looked back on the e-tickets that I have put on my YouTube channel. They listened back to Salem over the PA, thinking what they remember from it. And they finally said, hey, you're going to go in the booth with John Nix and you're going to call the season at the fairgrounds, which was amazing. And I was happier than I could have ever been because I thought, man, I just made the right decision. Like, I think maybe if I went to North Carolina, I clearly would have been closer to NASCAR. It would have been huge, but the signs definitely early on pointed to an opportunity in the Southeast and in the Midwest, and finally just opened the door to also the CRA series, which I'll be calling this year in 2024. And I did call a select races in 2023 with.
Is that Glenn Luckett that runs
Yes.
Salem? Okay, it is.
So
okay,
interesting story about Glenn. That was the cool part about when I went to Salem. I didn't really know anything about Glenn. I just knew Glenn had some type of connection with the CRA series. And I called the street stock race, the gas series, and I went on the track and I finished the call. All of a sudden, Glenn comes up to me. He's like, who are you? Did you just call that race? And I was like, yeah, that was me up there in the booth. He's like, Glenn Luckett. He gave me his number. He's like, we're going to keep in touch. And someone I knew at the fairgrounds that was there is like, hey, you know who that was? I was like, apparently it's Glenn Luckett. He's like, and he said, yeah, that's the director for CRA. So keep that in mind because the CRA series is pretty popular around here. He may get you in contact to call races with him. And I thought, oh man, that's awesome. Glenn then stepped down from CRA for the following season, but everybody in Track Enterprises works hand in hand. So the next person that came up worked at the fairgrounds and already knew of me and got an opportunity to call select CRA races in 2023. I believe it was Salem. I was supposed to call Anderson for a race, not the CRA Jegs All-Star Tour, but it was supposed to be a different series. And then I went to Winchester to call the Jegs race. So 2 Jegs races. No, actually, let's phrase that 3, because they went to Nashville and I also called that one. So yeah, this year, I believe, without me saying much, I'm supposed to call some more select Jeg Series All-Star Tour races. Already did the Speed Fest race. They have the street stocks at Bristol that are coming up, and that's going to be one heck of a weekend. I am praying for no rain whatsoever, because if rain comes, I have a decision to make, because Nashville is the following day, and that may, go ahead and damper some things. So.
Well, that's great. Hopefully the rains stay away. As race fans, every single race weekend, and hoping for that Bill France weather. That's awesome. It's a great story though about Glenn Luckett. I only had maybe 30 or 40 minutes to talk with him on a Zoom call, but just salt of the earth, great guy, knows so much about racing, and you just feel like he's one of those people that you can talk with him for maybe 10 minutes. And you feel like he'll have a job offer for you if he knows you well enough. He's just one of those great people. It's been around long enough to recognize talent like yourself. Calling races online, though, and I mentioned this earlier, calling races online and at the track is different. How big of a jump was that for you? Was that something where you felt like it was just a whole different ball game, or did you feel you could apply a lot of what you did online to calling races over PA or calling races from a broadcast booth?
So it was interesting. The first time that I got the opportunity, I was nervous. I was like, how big of a difference this is going to be. So the first thing I did was, when I found out it's ARC at Salem, I was like, okay, I got to figure out how the Salem track looks. I've never been out to Salem, Indiana. And I realized the track is not similar to Bristol. It definitely has higher bankment than the Bristol Motor Speedway. But I realized if I could put the Gen 6 cars on Bristol at iRacing, put the AIs on for ARCA paint schemes, I might be able to at least get a basis for how it will look. So I set up one camera at the top where the tower would have been, and I just called the race like that. I looked back on ARCA races throughout the season and started calling them on my own with like a headset on and just doing running trials. So when I called the Gas Boys, I butchered every name, but it was a lot of fun. I didn't know any of those names from those drivers because I didn't know I was calling the gas race at the time. I just got prepared for ARCA. So when the gas race ended with the street stocks, I was totally like, hey, man, you probably butchered every single name out there, but it sounded really good. I'm like, okay, next time I go ahead and call any races, I got to really learn these names, because when you go to the Midwest, when you go to the Southeast, when you go to the Northeast, and even the Southwest, name pronunciations are completely different. And I had no idea about that heading in. Now I do a lot better with names, because being able to call races in different regions of the United States, I kind of just figured it out. But I'll never forget, ARCA race is getting started. I'm up in the tower for the PA, and the first thing that comes to mind is, oh, this is actually happening. Like, okay, we're here, and this is very reminiscent to Bristol on iRacing. Let's just let it go. So I called it. It was a lot of fun, and I was surprised how much carried over from iRacing into in person. And now that wasn't a broadcast. That was obviously just over the PA. It was over the house, but I was really excited. I was like, oh man, there's a lot that I can test on iRacing in an NR night. And if I like it, I can bring it in person. That's where things got interesting, because my first broadcast I did at Nashville, the audio system broke, and it sounded like I was blaring the microphone, and I was so embarrassed. The next broadcast, I had to get a sports broadcasting headset. I was like, we are not going to deal with this ever again. And once that got fixed, the audio got fixed up, I was like, okay, I'm comfortable again. I feel like I belong here. Start getting connection with drivers, go in the pits early in the day. I start shaking hands, saying, how's it going? How's the car? How's it feeling? They'll give me some answers. I would use that for a broadcast. I'm like, I do that in the Discord for Enter and I talk to drivers. They'll definitely give me their opinion. And same with the guys in person. They have no problem telling you what their opinion is. And I would start just using that for the broadcast. Then later on in 2023, I realized there's a lot in person I can use for iRacing There's a lot in iRacing I can use in person. Would you be able to just straight up jump into a booth into Fox from iRacing? Most likely not. You would definitely have to go through the short track system and figure it out. But I'm definitely in an area I am now because I'm comfortable in the booth in person due to me being very comfortable in the booth for iRacing. For instance, I have a race coming up in the next couple weeks. You talk about Bristol. I'm excited for that because I know how the track works at Bristol. I watched back in old street stock races. Feel very comfortable with a headset on, and I love to talk. I could talk all day, honestly. I have no problem doing that. And the big thing now is to continue to use tools from iRacing for in person, continue to use also what I learn in person for in person, but just continue to have it go back hand in hand because it's a lot of things that have helped me online that have gotten me where I am today and vice versa with the in-person side.
I think it is very handy. And I think, you talked about how handy it is to have those tools, use them on iRacing, but you also talked about earlier taking all those notes from Mike Joy and Alan Bestwick. And just like a driver needs practice to do well in a race, I think broadcasters, podcasters, authors, whoever it is, they always, the old saying is practice makes perfect. And I think you taking notes and all that has made you the great broadcaster that you are. We've talked a lot about your short-term future. We've talked a lot about your past, but when you look at 5, 10, 15, heck, 20 years down the road, where do you want to see yourself? Do you want to see yourself in a broadcast booth? Do you want to see yourself in some other media journalism position? Where do you want to see your broadcasting future, your media future in racing in a decade or a decade and a half?
So that's interesting that you mentioned that because I'm in the next crossroad of my life where that is a decision I have to make. School's coming to an end. And the goal is NASCAR. The goal, even before speaking with you, was NASCAR. I would love to one day call racing consistently on a high level, whether that's the Truck Series, Xfinity Series, or even decades down the road, the NASCAR Cup Series. But in the next 10 years, I would love to be in trucks or even ARCA with Fox, NBC, Amazon, whoever picks up the deals in the future. I know CW is getting Xfinity. If I had an opportunity, even Pit Report at first, I would go ahead and take it. I love racing. I understand racing. I love calling broadcasts in motorsports, whether it's IMSA one day, Formula 2, 3, if it's the WEX series and stock car, IndyCar, I am honestly all for it. But if I also had an opportunity in, let's say, baseball, I'd go ahead and do that too. I played baseball 15 years of my life. One of the coolest things late into that running was the fact that someone told me I was a better coach because I can analyze and speak what's going on better than I was a player. And I always kept myself known of that. If I ever had an opportunity, let's say with the Nashville Sounds, to call a game, I'd go ahead and do it in a heartbeat. So it's interesting because I want to go to racing, but is that the path that I will be given? Is that the opportunity I'll be given in the next couple of years? Not exactly sure, but at the end of the day, it's still about just giving 110%. And if I do one day get an opportunity to call a NASCAR Truck Series race, ARCA race, broadcast it, or Xfinity, I would jump over it in a heartbeat. Jump at it in a heartbeat, should I say?
Well, I think
I
the
said
great
jump
thing
over
about
it.
No worries. I think the great thing about you calling so many races online, though, is that if Fox, NBC, CW, Amazon, whoever wants to take a look at you, they got hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of sample after sample after sample. And I think plenty of people could vouch for you. I mean, you have Glenn Luckett on your side. That's a pretty, good piece of ammo to have, a man like him on your side, and plenty of other folks as well. So I think that's great that you have that plan. And I mean, I'd vouch for you.
Yeah, I mean,
I know nobody in NASCAR's listening to me, in my opinion, but if they asked, who do you want to call the Truck Series, I'd put your name in the hat for sure.
Yeah, man, it's pretty cool that there are people on my side, and the big thing for me is just continue to learn. There's always an opportunity to learn. I sometimes listen back to how the broadcasts were in 22, and I can go, oh, I made that mistake. I made that mistake. I made that mistake. I can learn from it still and apply it to now. So what's great about 2024 is that there's a bunch of races lined up. So I will be busy from the in-person and the sim side. What will happen in 25, 2026, only time will honestly tell. But as long as I feel like right now, as long as I just continue to go at it, as long as I continue to push and don't quit, the opportunity in something will come up. In any sport, you never know what it's going to be. From what I heard, some people started with college football just over the PA, and then they would land in golf. And they said they had no idea that they could even do that. Some for baseball, they did high school baseball, and next thing you know, they're calling college football. So I love racing. I want to continue with it, but there's just so many unknowns heading into the future. But I'm very excited about it.
Well, I think it's great that you can be multifaceted because, there's so many different streaming services, channels nowadays, especially for sports. And there's always going to be a need for broadcasters, whenever they go to robot umps or in baseball or, whatever the are going to be, there's always going to be a need for somebody to bring that game, to bring that broadcast to the fan. And I think that's great that you can do that. And you talked about me wanting to do baseball or wanting to do something like that. Would baseball be your number one choice if racing suddenly flew out the windows? Say somebody at ESPN came up and said, "Hey, you want to do this random college baseball series in the middle of April?" Would you jump at that opportunity if racing just ceased to exist one day?
Oh, 100%. I would say if I had an opportunity outside of NASCAR or just stock car racing or any form of motorsport, if I had to be stick and ball, I'd have to go ahead and be baseball just because I understand the sport so well. When you play a sport consistently for 15 years, even if it's from T-ball to high school, and I know I didn't play in college, but I didn't forget how the sport runs. I mean, I still play slow pitch softball for my cousin's church, and I understand just certain techniques that I learned in high school, learned in middle school. So I would go at it in a heartbeat, whether it would be spring training, whether it just be a series, like you would say in the middle of April or May. I love baseball. There's just something about that sport that's completely different. It reminds me of racing in a way that has nothing to do with stick and ball. NASCAR is unique. You can't compare NASCAR to really anything else. I love when people try to make the comparison of F1 and NASCAR, how things go. Like, no, you can't do that. And you can't really do the same with baseball. Some tried to do that cricket baseball representation. No, still, I've seen cricket matches. I've seen F1 races, and I've seen NASCAR and baseball very consistently. Unique sports like that is what I love. I love the fact that there's a game in the middle of May that may be in the afternoon. There may be just 2,000 people in the ballpark, but they're all there to have a great time. There's something about the experience and just the excitement leading in. I love playoff baseball. Oh man, I love playoff baseball. So long term, if someone approached me with that opportunity, even on the minor league side, I'd have to jump all over it again.
Absolutely agree there, and I love that you mentioned that uniqueness of baseball, and I think you're absolutely right. There is truly nothing like baseball, whether that be the rowdiness of the fans in the stands, whether that be just the uniqueness of the game. And I think baseball, personally, there's so much more you can do on the analytical side of baseball. You see all these websites that these incredibly smart people build about just all these statistics that the normal layman would find obsolete in any other sport, but you go to baseball and then everybody somehow understands it. I've only been watching baseball like as a hardcore fan for 4 or 5 years. There's still so much I don't understand, but I do like that comparison you do to NASCAR. Like there's nothing like it. There's no NFL fan that's going to pull up an obscure statistic about a quarterback's completion percentage against this one DB or this one linebacker like you'll find a fan doing for a pitcher in baseball. And I think baseball fans and NASCAR fans are very unique in that, A, we have extremely long memories. If a pitcher beaned our favorite player when we were 5 years old, we remember. If a driver wrecked our favorite driver when we couldn't even walk, we remember. Comparison for sure. My last question for you, we've talked about broadcasting and that's all great, but at the heart of it, we're race fans, right? We love racing. You talked about your first big memory of NASCAR being that Elliott Sadler flip. What is your favorite moment in NASCAR history? Either, something that happened before you were born, after you were born, whenever, doesn't matter. What is your one moment that if you could go in a time machine, you'd say, okay, that's the one that I want to see in person?
So it's interesting as you mentioned that, as I've seen a lot of historical races. I feel like in times past, I saw Stewart's championship in 11 in person. I saw Ryan Newman's infamous wreck in 2020. I was right in front of the catch fence when Dylan slammed it in 2015 at the Coke Zero 400. So there's been a there's been a lot of moments, but if there was one that I was watching on TV, I would say 2009 Coke Zero. Growing up as a Tony Stewart fan, I looked forward to the Coke Zero 400 more than the Daytona 500. Now, today it's a little bit different. If I had an opportunity to call the Daytona 500 the Coke Zero 400, I'll have to go Daytona 500. But if you asked 8-year-old me that, I would 100% say Coke Zero, because Stewart was so much better in the Coke Zero race, the summer race, compared to the spring. And there's something about it, those paint schemes. Everyone had a different paint scheme, and that was in an era where usually you saw the same paint scheme week in and week out. But for the Coke Zero race, Stewart drove Burger King, and it was like, whoa, that's not the Office Depot car. And I'll never forget 2009. I'm 8 years old, and it was about 11 o'clock at night on the East Coast. And I just hear my dad scream, wreck him, wreck him, wreck him, because Kyle Busch took the lead. And this was still very much prime. People did not like Kyle Busch because of Richmond. You mentioned earlier that you can't forget, when a driver wrecks someone. Well, we all couldn't forget at that moment when Kyle Busch took out Dale Jr. Now, I wasn't a huge Junior fan growing up. I very much was a loyalist to Stewart, but I did not want to see Kyle Busch win. He won the Coke Zero race the year before. Coke Zero's my Super Bowl, and I'll never forget the call. Can't get him to the high side. Here he comes. There he goes. And the entire house erupted in screams. It was just a moment I will never forget, watching Stewart come to the line, Kyle Busch in the outside wall. Casey Kane just nails the 18. And I listened back to that call, because if you listen to it, it's not like what you would consider a strong broadcasting call in the way of structure, And I remember listening back, I'm like, man, this is not how I remember it. But then I thought about, I'm like, I enjoyed it so much as a kid, because the broadcasters went from broadcasters to race fans just in a second. And it also reminds me to remind myself that even though I would love to be a broadcaster, I'm still a race fan at heart. I went to Daytona and I sat in the grandstands. Could I have gotten the VIP pass and go in the garage area? Sure. But at the same time, you have to remind yourself that you are a fan at heart. And for me, that was one of the coolest moments ever. That Burger King car finishing. And I watch back on that race consistently. I love it. I actually do love that call. But I remember telling myself, it was so out of whack, just everyone getting excited in the booth. And it was so cool because, once again, everyone just became a race fan. So that's some of the things I do remind myself. And when I am in the booth, I do my best to be as professional as possible. But if you do have an opportunity to be a race fan, be a race fan. That's why we're all here. So a very exciting moment. But I am glad to say that I've seen a lot of historical moments. And just mentioned 2011, I saw Jimmie Johnson win 4 out of the 7 championships. Junior, I've seen Junior win twice. I saw him win the 2014 Daytona 500. I've luckily been in an area to experience these big moments, but definitely in 2009 Coke Zero, if I was in the grandstands then, oh man, it would have been crazy.
Would have been the loudest man in attendance that night. Yeah. I was in the stands, or I can't remember if I was in the suite or the stands. I was somewhere right on the front straightaway for the fall Talladega race in 2015, and I years at that point. And because I followed the herd, I was a Dale Jr. fan, and I will never forget how incredibly sad I was, how quickly the tears started rolling down my face when I hear over the PA system, Joey Logano has been declared the winner, because I knew I somehow understood the playoffs. I knew Junior needed a win. I had been elated when he barely beaten Jamie McMurray for that spot at Dover a few weeks prior, because I knew I'm going to Talladega. I might get to see him go to the next round and fight for the championship. And he lost by a couple inches. is. And until a couple years ago, when I finally realized that it's kind of stupid to hate quote unquote professional athletes, I hadn't gotten over my Kevin Harvick grudge until just a couple years ago because of that, him kind of wrecking the field there. But yeah, that's awesome that you chose that moment. I think those moments when we're younger and when we are truly just race fans, we don't even have that vein of broadcaster or media person. Those are the moments that always stick out, because that's when we're race fans at our purest, at our finest, I guess you could say. Maybe at our having the most fun, for sure. Thank you so much for joining the show, and I wish you the best of luck here. You're trying to finish up school. That's a tough task for all of us, but I think you've got this one in the bag. I think you've about lapped the field on this one. I think you're about to see that checkered flag. And we certainly wish you all the best at Bristol and upcoming and all your broadcasting ventures. And in a decade or less than that, I would not be at all surprised to see you up in that Fox booth, calling trucks, calling ARCA, calling Xfinity, whatever it may be. I think you're going to be a name that we see on our television screens.
Oh, thank you, man. I appreciate it. I really do.